Hello and welcome once again to episode 26 of Code Completion. We are a group of iOS developers and educators hoping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code. My name is Dimitri and I'll be your host for this episode. And I'm joined today by my fellow completionists, Ben Golke
Hey, hey.
and Spencer Curtis.
Hey there.
So before we begin our main topic, it's time for our indie app spotlight. Spencer, take it away.
All right, so the first app that we have is called Drone Trails, and it's meant to help you figure out where you can, should and can fly your drone to get some great footage. So it's this community that's built around, you can see where other people have flown their drones, get some and see their footage. It's got great other features like getting directions to those places. And the weather for the current weather for where that place is, and being able to share that with other people so you can kind of contribute to this community, which I think is a great idea. I don't personally have a drone, but I'm sure that I would use something like this. I know that for when I go and shoot photography, I love to do a little bit of research on whatever location I'm looking for, just so that I can kind of know what to expect. So, and do a little planning beforehand. So, if you do have a drone, I think this would be a really cool app for you to check out, and it's free. So, definitely go ahead and download it and give it a shot. The second app that we have is called Newsbite. This is an RSS news reader. For both iPhone and iPad, and actually the M1 Mac as well, or Apple Silicon Macs as well. It does RSS. It also can do Atom and JSON feeds as well. It's got widgets. It has, it will load the full article, and it's got a bunch of customization, which is super helpful, like your ability to change the font, the size of the font, the spacing, color, etc. Being able to tag articles, hide articles if you want to, I guess. Full pointer support. So if you're using a trackpad or a mouse on iPads, that's awesome. I think this is a super cool app. It's really clean. I really like the UI. You can organize things by groups, filter things, sort. Add things to your reading list. So if you want to throw them into something like the Safari reading list, that's great. You can also use Pocket or Instapaper. So definitely check it out. Okay, so the third app that we have today is called World of Hex. It is inspired by the 1983 game Fortress. If you have played that before or are familiar with it. What you do is it's kind of this turn-based game where you have these hex tiles and you sort of play as if you are in the world or in the entire solar system. It's kind of on a very large scale. You join one of four factions and then you kind of try to control all of these different tiles. And it's pretty cool. You can play on your own, and it kind of goes over like, well, what happens if you're not playing all the time, of course. You can kind of train this personal AI to defend or do things based on kind of what level you are. So it's kind of a cool idea. Go ahead and check it out. I think it'd be a really fun app for you to take a look at if you are kind of in the mood for that. And it's all cloud-based, so it's actually using CloudKit behind the scenes, which is awesome.
Are you an indie developer? We want to hear from you. Our list is getting shorter as we get through more and more of these wonderful apps. So please reach out to us on Twitter at Code Completion so we can spotlight your app too. So our first topic for today is all about what to do with old devices. And to kick us off, I have a bit of a story and some trials and tribulations that I went through with regard to an early 2020 MacBook Air. So as we all know, Apple released MacBook Airs and then promptly released M1 MacBook Airs, quickly obsoleting the computers that they just came out with last year. So we had a top-of-the-line MacBook Air, and then as soon as The M1 ones came out that kind of blew it and pretty much every other computer Apple had out of the water. We got an M1 MacBook Air, and we were looking to try to sell the previous one because we really didn't need two MacBook Airs, and especially an older one that was not especially fast compared to everything else that we have. So I first tried selling it on Twitter. No one was really interested. I tried selling it to friends. They all wanted M1s anyways. So that didn't go through. And then I finally checked on Apple's website, and they have something along the lines of like, hey, if you have a MacBook Air, you can get up to $600 for the trade-in. I would suggest you scroll up on that page and actually try to trade in your computer, because that quickly got reflected as you can get up to $1,000 on that particular model that we had, which was like a 1 terabyte, like souped up. So we went through that process, and I tried with and without. Hey, do you have the power extension, the power brick, and the USB-C cord? That's like a $10 difference, so just keep it. Like, you're coming out ahead by keeping those accessories. So my total estimate was $990. And it was through a company called Phobio or Phobio. I don't know how they came up with that name, but something about buying previous phones. And they partnered with Apple to do this. So for that to work, everything else was closed, so that was the only option. I had to send it or put in that request. They send a box. I put everything in that box after wiping everything. And then I send it over to them and wait. And either everything is in good condition and you're good to go, or they tell you there's an issue and they would send it back at that point. So I did all that, and I erased everything just as the instructions said. That is now in their hands. And at that point, roughly a week and a half later, I get an email that says something scary along the lines of, we couldn't securely erase your device, even though I wiped everything. So that was already securely deleted. We couldn't securely erase your device, but we can recycle your device for free at a trade-in cost of $300 or something for, I guess, the spare parts, or you can have it sent back to you. So I am immediately kind of pissed, because I did not expect to send in a perfectly working computer for $300, and I'm expecting like they broke something in the process. But they told me I can send it to the Genius Bar and they can fix the issue, and I can try again. So I said, okay, send it back to me. I wait another week and a half for that to come back to me. And then I kind of sat on it because Genius Bars are closed and they weren't available at the time until I saw a news story about a week ago that said Apple's now lowering the trade-in costs for the MacBook Air from $600 to $500. And that's that first cost that they have before you scroll up on the page. So I immediately panic and I'm like, okay, time to schedule a Genius Bar appointment now that things are opening up again. And it also turns out that the price went up from $1,000 to $1,020 for that actual trade-in, which made no sense to me. But like thinking about it, and after talking with the people at the Apple Store afterwards, it seems like it's related to the chip shortage that is currently ongoing, and that's actually boosting the prices of old computers because the chips are already there. So in any case, I go to the Apple Store and I go to the Genius Bar and I say, hey, like this is not. They said there's an issue with erasing. Is there anything you can check? They never heard of that issue before, of course. But they went and reinstalled everything and everything seemed to work fine. And they were happy to trade it in like then and there. So I didn't even have to send it back. So more of the story, if you want to trade in your stuff, do it in an Apple Store. It's way easier. Do scroll up on that page and get a much better price than the up to price. That didn't seem at all very useful. And 3, keep your accessories because you are definitely coming out ahead. They even asked me at the store, I was like, do you want to give back your charger and cable? And actually, never mind. It's only a difference of $10. I would suggest you keep it. That's what the guy said to me. But like, end of the story, that was fairly seamless. And I would if you don't need your device again, I would suggest checking the Apple trade-in. It seems to be fairly smooth. Like pivoting a little, like Apple stores during COVID. I haven't been to one like since COVID started, and it felt cleaner than the outside mall that it was in, which was steaming with people, no mask, like not even one on their person, just walking around in groups. And I had like a minor anxiety attack being outside of that store, waiting for my check-in time. I like found a corner and huddled as close to it as possible to stay away from people. Which is talking about post-COVID recovery. Some people apparently it's very easy for them. Others apparently it's going to be a little harder. But the Apple Store was like super clean. They had stations at every table for with like alcohol wipes and stuff like that. And there was hardly anyone in there. So that definitely felt like the safer space compared to outside, which was interesting. But that whole story is kind of an intro to our topic, which is what should you do with old devices? I've traditionally like kept and hoarded everything I have. I'm basically building a cable museum at this point with everything that I have accumulated. And there's some merit to that, but there's obviously some demerit, meaning old devices, old batteries, things like that. So, Spencer, why don't you start us off? What do you do with your old devices?
Yeah, it depends on what the device is and if I think I'm going to have a use for it. So, as an example, I had a similar situation to you when the M1 Max came out, where I had bought a 2015 MacBook Pro for something like maybe just over $2,000 when I was in college, and that was kind of my daily driver up until I eventually kind of got a real job and was able to kind of buy a desktop and everything. And I loved that MacBook Pro, and I was like, it had sentimental value to me, but I was like, it's starting to chug a little bit. It's not going to be something that is really going to be near as useful as an M1 Mac if, the rumors were to be believed at the time. So I began to do the same thing as you, where I looked at the Apple trade-in program. However, they probably because it was an older device and it was one with an upgraded GPU and it had extra storage, but they still would only give me something like, I want to say it was around $430 for a $2,000 MacBook. And I was like, man, I know it's only like, it's been 5 years, but that seems like a lot lower than it should be. So I started looking around at my local classifieds, and here in Utah, we have Craigslist, but we also have another kind of classifieds list that's used more often in Facebook Marketplace. So there are a few places to look. And I eventually saw that they were selling for around $700 to $800. And so I went that route and sold it that way and got almost double the money. And then bought myself, my MacBook Air for about the same price. Spent a few $100 extra on upgraded storage and everything. But however, I also have things like Mac Minis. I had a 2011 Mac Mini. Right now, I just have a 2012, and I've thought about selling it, but at the same time, I know I'll get less than $200 even if I sell it on a classifieds list. And I've got a couple projects that I want to do. One is I'm probably going to use that to control my home speaker setup with a Vapor app that I wrote to kind of toggle things off and on. So it really depends on if I think I'll have a use for it or not. And, if it's valuable enough to make it worth selling. And in a lot of cases, I just probably mostly end up selling things, or for example, like my phones, I just do the Apple trade upgrade program every year. So I don't keep my iPhones as much as I would love to have like an iPhone museum. That's kind of expensive. So I just get the new phone every year and kind of call it good there. Ben, what about you?
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of a mixed bag. For me, I haven't done the upgrade program. I had T-Mobile, I live in the United States, and had T-Mobile for my carrier, and then switched to, we had AT&T for a while, and then also now I have Verizon. And for a long time, I forget, I think it was either T-Mobile, I think it was T-Mobile maybe. But anyway, where for whatever reason, the upgrade program wasn't available to you for ordering and having it shipped to your house if you wanted to participate in the upgrade program if you had that carrier. So it was like, in order for me to get onto the upgrade program, I would have to have gone and waited in line on launch day to get a phone. And I did that in the first, I've had an iPhone since the iPhone 3G, and the first, I don't know, probably 3 or something iPhones that I owned, I would go, that was it. That was all you could do. So I went, I mean, you could definitely order it online, but I went and stood in line. But I have since instead been getting up at like midnight, and now they've made it better for East Coast and worse for West Coast, where it's now at a sane time for East Coast people. It's like 8 a.m. But it's very early for or maybe it's 6 a.m. Whatever. It's much better than 3 o'clock in the morning like it used to be. Which I did. I used to set an alarm and get up at 2:45 and wait, and then fight with the iPhone, the Apple Store app, and the website open, and then the website open on a different browser on a different computer, and like, which one is going to happen for, So that whole dance compared to like going in. But I didn't do the upgrade program because at the time it was just, I couldn't kind of like get it going because I wasn't on the right carrier. So, and then interestingly enough, 2 years ago, so not last year for the 12, but the one before that, I thought I enrolled in the iPhone upgrade program. But what I actually enrolled in with the iPhone 11 was just making payments. I screwed up the order, and because they gave you both options. You could do like just payments, or you could do the upgrade program. And I thought that I was enrolling in the upgrade program. It was not totally clear. And it was actually just like, oh, we're just going to pay for this in payments. And I was like, well, okay, that's not really what I wanted, but it's too late now. So, so then this past year with the iPhone 12, I ended up trading in that phone and then getting the iPhone 12, and then I just paid for it outright because after the trade-in, it only ended up being like a couple $100 out of my own pocket to then just pay for the whole thing outright and just call it done, which is what I've traditionally done. I haven't done the upgrade program. So then the problem is when you have a fully paid for phone that you own, right? The upside is you own it. The downside is then you are responsible to sort of deal with getting rid of it if you don't want to keep it after you upgrade to the new device. And so for me, it has been kind of a mixture of occasionally selling them, mostly trading them into Apple. I think maybe like one local kind of a sale, and then other times with both that and more so with things like iPads and other sort of tech, I've become kind of known as Apple Santa in my family and friend group, where basically I have a device that I don't need anymore because I've replaced it with something else, or I just literally don't need it anymore for whatever reason. And I think about like putting it on Craigslist or I don't have a Facebook account anymore, so I'd have to, I guess, make one to go on Facebook. I don't know. I haven't delved into the Facebook Marketplace thing. And just all those ideas just sound, even before the pandemic, just seem kind of like gross. Like I don't want to meet somebody in a parking lot, and it's just like, it just isn't my thing. So, and I've tried, I think I sold one device to Gazelle, it's a third party trade-in site, and it went fine, but in general I just again, this is very much a first world problem, but like just kind of a hassle, and so I end up usually if I don't trade it into Apple, the sort of the alternate is that I end up giving it to someone. I end up giving it to a family member or a friend or something that maybe is, particularly like if they have a device that's maybe a couple generations old, I'll say, hey, would you like this one? It's like last year's model. It's got, more storage and sort of a better camera than what you have. So it would be an upgrade for you. If you want, I'll just give it to you. And they take it and they use it. And that way it still has a life, right? It's not just sitting in a drawer somewhere. Again, it would be kind of cool to maybe own like the first phone, like my 3G, the first iPhone that I had, just to keep that around just for nostalgia purposes. But in general, there's enough clutter like gets sort of enters our house and doesn't seem to be able to leave. So having like a pile of old tech is an issue. The funniest part though is that, just to kind of wind this story down, is that I keep all my boxes for things like iPhones and iPads and whatever.
Right.
Everything. Like there's actually, we moved and I don't have, in this new house in my office, I don't have a closet. It's a room that is basically designed to be either an office or a living room. So there is no closet in here. So I haven't figured out what to do yet. I've got like I'm looking at a pile in the corner of my room of like nothing but Apple boxes. Yeah. Empty Apple
Nice.
boxes, all kinds of stuff. And the funniest part is, because I invariably end up giving away some of this tech, I usually I keep everything. I keep the package, I keep the box, I keep like the wrapping that the thing came in. And when I give it away, I try to, like, I wipe it, I clean it, I wipe the device, and then I wipe the device down, like literally try and make it look nice. And then I put it back in its packaging. I'll like try and put the clear plastic around it again and all that, and put it back in the box. So that way, when I give it to someone, then like they get to have their own like unboxing experience. Maybe people don't
That's
care,
cool.
but that's like my favorite part of getting a new piece of tech is aside from getting to use it is unwrapping it. And Apple's packaging is always just, it's like way better than anybody else's. So it's extra fun. But the funniest part is, like, sometimes it isn't convenient, and so I just end up giving it to them. And then so what ends up happening is I now have more boxes than I have stuff. Like, I end up with like, well why do I still have this box? Oh, it's because I had this thing and then I gave it away, and it wasn't convenient to give them the box at the time. So then, like, do I get rid of it? Do I just throw it away? Like, I don't know. So I basically, instead of a museum of Apple of like tech, I have a museum of boxes, which I feel like is arguably worse, but I'm not sure. So that's my giving away old devices story.
No, I certainly feel you with the Museum of Old Apple boxes, because it's just, I don't know why I don't want to throw them away, but I feel like, oh, they'll come in use one day when I put this device away, I guess.
Right.
So one thing that is useful about keeping old devices around is for testing. Like, it certainly is useful to have more than one iOS device. And it used to be useful in the past to have an older iOS device because it was significantly slower than the new ones. Nowadays, though, that is less of a thing, I feel like, because the more recent iPhones, they've long since eclipsed like Mac performance, and Macs have been running fine for the past 10 years in terms of like keeping up with the times. And so have iOS devices for the most part. It's usually the battery that goes before the performance of the device itself becomes a problem. So I'm curious to hear about how many devices either of you have around for testing for iOS development, and how many you kind of just think you need to keep around but you don't ever touch after that point. So yeah, like what is your strategy there?
Poor. My strategy is poor. So I have my iPhone 12, my main daily driver phone that I use for everything, and I predominantly test on that. At work, where I even use it at my job to do testing, and we are in the process of trying to procure sort of official test devices for each member of the team, so that are owned by the company rather than just using our own. That way, we don't have to use our own, and that was driven in part by a member of my team who's on the Android side using his personal Android phone that was a little bit older, a couple years old. It was I think a Pixel 1, if I'm not mistaken. And we were reasonably sure that him testing the app, which our app is very, it uses a lot of resources, potentially smoked his phone. Like, he wasn't able to reboot it or use it again, and had to buy a new phone as a result. So that's not good. So we're in the process of trying to get test devices, official ones, in for the company so that we can do that. But as far as for me personally, my daily driver phone, we've got an iPad Pro, the 12.9 inch. I'm pretty sure it's the first generation 12.9 inch. I think they only made one. Is this right that they only made one generation of the 12.9 when it had the home button, or were there two of
Yes.
those? Okay. Yeah. So then generation 2 was the edge-to-edge screen, and then generation 3 was the same thing,
One
but
extra GPU.
with a GPU and the lidar camera. And then maybe on the 20th, which is what we're going to be talking about in a minute, maybe we'll get new ones. But so we have that. We have like a 2016. No, 2017. Whenever the first gen Pro iPad came out,
I think
we have one of those.
2017, yeah.
Okay. And then we also have an iPad Mini 4th gen that I basically just use to watch YouTube videos before I go to sleep. And of all the devices in our house that we could use for testing, that one is definitely the oldest and the slowest. In fact, I'm hoping that they might update the Mini in a few days, and I could, either trade that one in or keep it around on purpose for sort of older testing. But yeah, I basically, for daily use, I want like the newest and fastest one. And then because I generally trade them in or give them away, I don't end up with that many test devices around. So yeah, that's definitely a bad habit on my part. I should be doing more like performance testing of the apps that I build. Not just on the latest and greatest stuff, because not everybody's going to have the latest and greatest device. How about you, Spencer?
Yeah, I'm basically the same. The only iOS devices that I own myself are my iPhone and my second generation iPad Pro 12-inch. And then I have a couple iPads here for work. But one's the new iPad Air, and then I think the other one's a 5th generation iPad, so it's like from 2017 as well. Not that old, but
Right.
Yeah, basically the same thing for me. Unfortunately, I need to do better at that. Everything that I'm doing personally, like all of my iOS apps, aren't particularly demanding as far as I can tell. I wish that you could, just like you have like the network link conditioner, I wish you could on the simulators simulate
Have a performance conditioner.
Yeah, that would be really cool because
Pretend this is 5 years old. Now run.
yeah, exactly. I don't know, like artificially downclock it or whatever, or even
The whole
on a
system
real
downclocks.
device. It would be cool. I think that would be like a
Xcode
worthy.
slows down. The clock
Well,
slows
okay, not the whole thing, just the device, not my Mac. But yeah,
but you can see
no,
why
for
that'd be
me-
useful, because the mini I have, it's just for watching YouTube, right? And I also have like Hulu and stuff.
Yeah.
On it. And even that, like I can tell like opening the YouTube app, it takes a longer time than it really should.
Just
You can tell that it's struggling. So
yeah, just today, someone at work was asking if anyone had an iPad Air 2 because I think that's like the lowest supported, the slowest iPad supported by iOS 14. So we were trying to see,
Right.
performance wise how it would work, and I think that's a great thing. Again, if I don't have a use for it, I'm not going to keep it around. I wish I did, but also, I'd rather probably spend the money on a newer device or
right.
on something else.
Plus, then you got to keep them charged and sort of.
Yes,
And then
keeping two iPads charged is a pain.
And then even like, should you upgrade it to the latest OS or not? Like, there's, I mean, in theory, what you might want is like an iPad,
with
let's say,
it's iOS 13 still.
yeah, and then maybe also the same model running 14, so you can see like, does it run better on one or the other? Depending on how crazy you want to get, like you can end up with not just older devices, but like variants thereof.
Yeah.
And that can become an issue. There are services and stuff that you can supposedly subscribe to. I don't know how like non-scammy they are, but that you can like deploy your app to physical devices that then they somehow like give you remote access to, so that you can test them. I've seen services like this. I know they're very prevalent with Android.
But you wouldn't be able to tell performance at that point.
Yeah, it's true, right? Because like it's all through a network connection and stuff.
Looking
So
at it, yeah.
But
One thing that you can consider is that older devices tend to get way cheap the older they get.
it's true.
That's true.
So, like, one anecdote is when we got married, my wife and I, we wanted to do something similar to the breaking the glass tradition, but we are nerdy. So we went on to eBay and we found iPhone 3GSs for $4. They were defective in some condition, and I was like, I don't care. I'm gonna stomp on these. But it turns out they like turned on fine. The camera, the microphone, everything like worked. I have no clue what part of this device was defective, but it was $4. And we were unable to smash or break them in any way. So rock solid device.
Nice.
5 stars, Apple. Good job.
Nice.
10 years down the line.
Yeah.
But the moral of that story is that you can totally find old devices, especially if you're trying to find the last supported device of the current generation OS or the previous generation OS. You can definitely find those and not need to pay too much of an arm and a leg for them. So if you don't necessarily want to buy a new device every year, you want to buy a new device every 2 or 3 years, you can still like fill in those gaps if you need to down the line when you need them. Like, ironically enough, my device collection at this point, just like Ben said, I'm kind of like Santa at the end of the year. My phone will go to someone in the family, and their phone will kind of trickle down, and then eventually they come back to me. So I do have the tail end of that, which is good, but I never really make use of it. And since my wife Lynn is also doing iOS development, she's kind of inherited all of that. So on her desk is a very nice display of all the old phones one after the other, and their little docks all kept charged because batteries, if you keep them charged, they last longer. Don't leave them in a drawer. The battery will die quickly that way. But she has that all set up, and that actually came in use when she was testing NotFA, because she's really pushing SwiftUI in a lot of those scenarios, and that runs fine on a modern device. But on the older ones, things were a little slower. Like if you tap on something, you could wait up to a second for the screen to even realize the tap happened, as SwiftUI was recomputing everything in the background. So that was actually a valuable thing to have around. So if you can, and you are doing iOS development, if you're doing something simple, you probably never need to think about it. But if you are pushing anything in any way, it is useful to have that as just a quick test before you release, just so that way you know that people may complain about certain aspects, or you might need to warn them for others that things might be a little slower. They might not work as well on a smaller phone screen. Up until now, like the only small screens were the old ones, but now we get new small screen devices. So yay there. Though the simulator can kind of take care of a lot of those scenarios too. But as Spencer said, it would be really nice to have a performance conditioner that you can turn on a newer device, just to put it in the state that maybe the battery throttling state, for instance, just to kind of see how your app would behave in that scenario. So I guess stuff to look forward to in future WWDCs, right? Because that's usually when those kind of features get released. So as Ben was alluding to, as we record next week is Apple's Spring Loaded event. As this gets released, hopefully we can get it released right before the Spring Loaded event, which is on Tuesday. And since it's spring related, and since Tim Cook was talking about Apple Cars during his most recent interview, that means that Apple Car Smart Suspension System is confirmed. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly
I think so, yeah.
So this is the event that we've all been waiting for AirTags to finally make their debut. They just recently unveiled the public API portion of that for third-party companies to kind of integrate with the Find My system. I assume both of you are looking forward to that.
I am personally. I think there will be, the obvious Apple tax on such devices. However, if it's a first-party device. However, I've had a tile, or actually now I have 2 tiles for the last about year or so, and they are so nice. I have one on my wallet and one on my keychain because I will inevitably not do what they tell you to like put your keys in one place. I never do that. Sometimes it's in my bedroom, sometimes it's in my office, downstairs, whatever. And so it's invaluable to me. I can't even tell you how many times I've spent 5, 10, 15 minutes looking for my keys or my wallet. So I'm stoked for that. Or even if I'm not quite sure, I haven't kept up and on specifically with this AirTags portion of this current event cycle, so you guys could enlighten me probably. But if it's first party, great. If not, if it's just better support within iOS, that's awesome too. Yeah, either way, I'll be happy because that's something that I use pretty much on the daily.
Yeah, I'm interested in AirTags. I am also the kind of person that will instantly lose stuff like that if if I'm not careful about it. And so a very long time ago, I got basically a wooden bowl to like hold keys and wallet and kind of, all that kind of stuff. And so now, except for those times where I stupidly don't follow my own pattern and I don't put them in there they get lost. Except for those kinds of occasions, I'm pretty good about kind of keep track of those kind of things. So I don't know if I have a huge need for AirTags in my life, but I'm interested to kind of see what they announce. I think almost what might be more exciting is the idea that Find My as a service is coming to third-party hardware. So like I think it was.
Yeah.
Is it Belkin? I forget who it was, but somebody has announced these very AirPods-like headphones, a little case, they're shipping in June, but they're going to support the Find My system. Van Moot, I think is what it's called. It's a like a swanky electric bike company. They're launching a new model of one of their electric bikes that supports Find My. Again, launching in June. So none of the stuff's launching right this second, but I'm excited about that idea. Of course, that only is going to be useful in so far as companies actually bother to adopt and be part of this program. So if it kind of goes nowhere, then that won't be that exciting. But if enough sort of third parties get interested in it and want to include it, I think that'd be pretty cool to have all that stuff like in the Find My app and being able to track that stuff down. And I'm also really intrigued by I'm not sure if this is currently true, but they've talked about how the Find My thing will basically use, it sounds like it's using, I'm going to grossly overgeneralize here because I have barely looked into it, but it sounds like it's using something that's extremely vaguely similar to the COVID exposure notification program that Google and Apple built.
That's correct.
Where they're kind of going to use like the fact that there's hundreds of millions of iOS devices out in the world, they're going to make it so that if you lose a set of AirPods or an iPhone or something, right, maybe that doesn't have, I guess, good internet connectivity on its own, either because it's been disabled, that part of it, or like in the case of AirPods, they just don't have their own cell radio, where people walking by can just through their proximity can sort of ping that device, and then through like a very long proxy chain of contact from that location with that random person and that person's iPhone can eventually like make it all the way back to you through this Find My network, where you can be sort of notified where this thing is, even though you are not necessarily anywhere close to that item. You can still get notifications of where it might be. And they're doing it in a way that is supposedly completely anonymous for the people involved, like in the mesh, to help you find it. And so you won't know about anybody who has sort of been near your device. You'll just sort of get this magic notification that, oh, your device is in X place, and then you can, in theory, go get it and recover it, which I think is a really cool and a really kind of a cool idea. So again, for both Apple stuff and also hopefully for a growing collection of third-party devices, if that were the reality, that would be pretty cool, and that would certainly give you kind of peace of mind on losing your stuff, which is much like you, Spencer. I'd lose my head if it wasn't screwed on all the way, right? So like it's I lose stuff all the time, and I've only kind of. It's like we're at home all the time, and I have a place to put like the most important things, and that's really the only thing keeping me from losing stuff. So,
for real.
So having this service, I think would be pretty cool.
That's one of the biggest downsides of Tile, in my opinion. It's that you have to have the Tile app, and you have to launch it fairly often for it to stay kind of available, and you have to hope that other people do that too, which I can guarantee in most cases is probably not going to help you find your device. So the fact that Apple can make use of its hundreds of millions of iOS devices, whether those are iPhones or iPads, I think that is really going to change the playing field here, because it enables basically anyone that's driving by, like forget about walking
Yeah.
by. If you're driving by and that device catches a ping from your little tag there, that is going to kind of propagate all the way back to you. But Apple has gone further than just that. Like they were also thinking about what happens if someone puts this tag on your person and you have no clue
Right.
about it. If you have an iOS device, it's going to tell you if you've been traveling with one of these tags. Hey, there's a tag that's kind of following you around. You might want to check your belongings. Someone might be following you. Or
You've been bugged.
alternatively, yeah, exactly.
Literally.
And alternatively, if you don't have an iOS device, the tag itself will beep as a safety precaution. So that way you will also know if you're traveling with that tag that it is kind of following you around. And it's not like you're going to steal the tag, right?
Right.
You stealing the tag would indicate where you are, so it's not a viable strategy. So it's a kind of good thing as more of a preventative measure as well to kind of prevent people from stealing these things, especially when it's built into the bike, right? You can always take the tag out of a backpack unless you sew it in, but you can't really disassemble that part of the bike very easily, especially if it's an interconnected electric bike. So I think that is a very interesting avenue that Apple is taking it. Of course, they're trading in the secrecy of tracking your device, but I think that's probably the right call with how our society has kind of gone in recent years. It's funny, we always think about GPS devices and like tracking and all of that as being something that's part of everyday life, but up until now, it's largely remained sci-fi. Like if you want to track a car with a GPS device, the battery is this big and you lump it with a big magnet underneath the car and it doesn't last very long. So like the ability for others to track people up until now has not been very practical. And this kind of technology will make it practical. So I think it's very important that Apple does think about those sorts of trade-offs when they are kind of putting this together. And other companies are probably not thinking about it to that extent. Like Samsung 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago also came out with their Samsung Tile thing. I can guarantee you they did not put an ounce of effort into thinking about those aspects. They just wanted to be first to the market with ultra-wideband tracking technology.
Right. And this seems like a classic... this is a classic Apple move, right? Where they're late to the game. Tile's been around for years and years and years, but they have much better implementations, in this case, security-wise, but also these features that maybe people are using Tiles to, like you said, track people without their knowledge or whatever is, I don't know, implementation, like not to fanboy here, but I'm going to fanboy because, it's... They're thinking about edge cases that matter on not just a level of the average user, but also, how could this actually be abused and how can we try to prevent that? And that's, to me, that's, why I enjoy Apple products and I pay the Apple tax to have these things so that my phone isn't just running random software tracking me all the time. It's built into the OS that it can't do that unless Apple's the one doing it, in which case, okay, I trust them on a deeper level than some random company. So I'm excited for AirTags. If all of these rumors are true and this speculation about sort of the software side, I think it's going to be great.
If only they would be that thoughtful about like nefarious scams in the App Store, we would all be.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Good point.
So I think we'll save that topic for next episode because that is a huge can of worms.
There is a limit to their benevolence, I suppose.
There you go.
I don't think I'm a fanboy in that regard at all.
Agreed.
No.
I just hope the AirTags, going back to the topic here, are not too big. My primary hope to use them is to attach them to my cats because they're indoor cats, and we are kind of terrified of them kind of escaping, chasing after something, and then being lost. I mean, people drive at insane speeds on the roads. They have never seen a car before, and it's a wild west out there. So we hope that we can kind of use this as just a level of insurance that might help us find them if something happens,
no,
because
definitely.
they'd be clueless as much as they are kind of prepped for wildlife. They have not lived that life, so it'd be unfortunate for them to find themselves in that situation. In terms of other devices, Ben, you are looking forward to new iPad minis. What kind of features are you hoping that this hypothetical iPad mini has?
Well, basically able to handle watching YouTube on it.
Ooh,
Like my my
that's a hard ask.
my
As the
needs are pretty
YouTube
low.
coprocessor.
Yeah, YouTube coprocessor. So yeah, I mean, basically, really, I just would like to replace what is now fairly aging iPad Mini that I've been using with one that just is snappier, and I pretty much don't use that iPad for anything else. I had an iPad Pro second gen 12.9 with the keyboard and everything that I liked, and I used it. I found it to have somewhat diminishing sort of day-to-day use, and so I ended up getting rid of it. I sold it. So as far as like other than my phone, I have my iMac, which I use for work and most kind of serious computing. I've got my MacBook Air, M1 MacBook Air, which I bought for portable work if I needed to sort of be on the move and get some work done. In particular, it was when we were looking at houses and trying to move and stuff. I was worried about us potentially being in an extended period where we kind of everything was packed, which included my iMac, and like I needed to get work done. So that was a somewhat thinly veiled excuse to get a MacBook Air.
Whatever works.
But whatever works, right? I really like that. But so basically, my only other computer besides that is this little iPad Mini, and I don't really use it for anything but watching YouTube at night because it is so slow and just generally not a great like general purpose machine. So for me, if they come out with, I've heard rumors that they might be coming out with this is probably a pipe dream, but like an iPad Mini Pro, kind of basically taking the best ideas from the current iPad Pro line, which also now includes the Air as far as the design, like the edge-to-edge screen, the Face ID rather than Touch ID, no home button, potentially I want to say the 5th gen Mini, which is currently for sale, does have pencil support, but it's Gen 1 pencil support. So maybe they
Glue is
bring
the pencil.
Gen 2 pencil support and they give the little magnetic thing on the side and whatever. And if that were the case, I do feel like I'd probably use it from, and it was obviously snappier, more speedy. I would probably use it for more than just watching videos. I would, probably kind of go back to using it as a, having an iPad in my life, basically, reading, stuff like that. And I'm I'm excited about that in particular because while I did really enjoy my giant 12.9-inch iPad Pro, it was huge. And despite being much lighter than the previous iPad Pro that it replaced, still a pretty heavy device. And especially if you add the keyboard and stuff onto it, it's not something you're just going to kind of fling around. It was pretty hefty. So and just physically large, which in some applications is really handy. And if you're just trying to read something or whatever, you're trying to be more casual, like on the couch, it can kind of be a little bit of a burden that it's that big. So I've never used an iPad Mini as a general purpose iPad. I originally bought this Mini to use with my my drone as like basically a video device for flying the drone. So I've never used a Mini as a general purpose iPad. So if this rumor that we've heard is true, and they basically do like a refreshed iPad Mini edge to edge, Face ID, pencil support, that kind of thing, like essentially kind of turn it into like the mini, the new mini iPhone, right? Like it's got essentially everything. It's just smaller physically in size. I'd be pretty excited about that to use not just as an upgrade, but also to maybe sort of reintegrate the iPad into my daily workflow and use that for a variety of things and kind of see test out that form factor of size and see if it might be, more useful than my phone for those occasions. That's the biggest problem with the iPad is like, I have my phone in my pocket not 24 hours a day, but like basically whenever I'm awake, my phone is either in my pocket or near me and within arm's reach. And it is so incredibly useful. People say it's kind of like your second brain. It's so incredibly useful to me in my day-to-day use that, like, in order to sort of supplant that, you have to bring something either very seriously better or at least different enough in the use case to kind of have me take the phone out of my hands and replace it with something else, right? I think that's always been like my biggest issue with the iPad is that it until recently it hasn't been differentiated enough from the phones. Like, why would I do that on just what is essentially just a bigger screen when it's actually usually more convenient just to do it on my phone? So I think that's kind of been my hang up with the iPad, is that it's like really cool and different, but like inconvenient in enough ways that I'll just bring my phone with me instead, right? Because I can do it on my phone too, and it's not this big thing that I have to lug around.
I would say that's almost the downside of the iPad mini. It's too close to the phone. So the bigger screen of the 11-inch, which I think is a kind of a sweet spot there where it's not too big and not too small, kind of gives the iPad more utility in that regard. That said, Apple has also kind of been neglecting the iPad just as much as they've been neglecting the Mac ever since ever. There is so much more potential to these devices. For instance, I use my iPad Pro, a supposedly pro device, to read at night. Like it's my reading device. I do other things on it, like I do research, I check my email and stuff like that. And it serves as a second screen in many cases, but I don't really use the processing power of the iPad very much. And it's mostly just the fact that it is a portable, largish screen device that's not too big and too crazy, which the 12.9-inch one definitely feels like it. I think that's where its utility comes from. I would love to see Apple think about like more utilities for the iPad. For instance, I would love to use the iPad as a terminal to all my various Macs, which may be in a different room when I'm in bed. Like the iPad is a nice small device. I would love to use that to access the stuff that is on my Macs. You can do that, but it's a pain. Like there's no integrated story there where you can just tap a button and then you just see your Mac screen and you can have full control over that. You have screen sharing, but screen sharing is sluggish. It's not very smooth. You have the sidecar, but the sidecar is something you initiate from the Mac. It's not even from the iPad. So that's fast, but the opposite. You have things like Luna Display, but that's to add a display to a Mac, not to replace its current one. So there's like we are almost there for those kinds of use cases, and I feel like that would be so useful in many cases. We have handoff and stuff like that, but if your software that you use, Xcode, is not there, or like a full version of something that you're using, then it's not really going to be super useful to you there. So instead of like a more powerful iPad, I think Apple really needs to think about those kinds of use cases or those kinds of stories. Like, what can the iPad really excel at, and concentrate on those. But like next week is a new device day, so we're going to get new devices and they're going to be faster, and that's going to be more useful in the future when that becomes the baseline. So it is good that progress is marching forward. I just hope Apple kind of sees the utility in their own devices and kind of optimizes for that rather than just giving a refresh that I don't think is truly needed, right? I mean, the iPad Air 2, that's an ancient device. It still runs iOS 14. So it was more than capable back then to meet the baseline for now's technology. And of course, it's probably going to be next on the cutting board for iOS 15. But I would like to see them not only push the performance, but push the utility of the iPad, because I would love to use it more. It's just I can't, like, just not possible.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, that's that exact reason. The utility was the exact reason why I wanted to sell my first generation iPad Pro, because I didn't really use it. I mean, I bought it because I was like, oh, I'm going to do a bunch of drawing and I'm going to use Affinity Photo with my iPad, or, my Apple Pencil and all that. And then I never wanted to, because it was more convenient to do on my Mac. And
Right.
I didn't really ever end up drawing anything. And then when they actually added first party support for mouse and keyboard, well, they had the keyboard, but keyboard support, and they came out with the Magic Keyboard and everything, and I was like, okay, that's where the utility game is stepped up for me. And so I sold my first generation, bought a second generation, and I use it a ton more now, just because it is essentially a computer, like they claim. That said, I absolutely agree with you, Dimitri. I don't think it needs to be any faster. I have, one that's a few generations old, but it, is just fine for anything I throw it at. I'll render movies on LumaFusion just fine, and it works great. Yeah, I think they could satisfy developers so easily if they just added, an extension of Xcode where even if it rendered on your computer that was on in the other room or something, but you could actually write code and run the simulator or something. I don't know. That would be awesome. I would love to be able to just sit in bed and, use my iPad or whatever. But then now we have the M1, MacBook Airs that are, it's so close to my iPad now that utility has dropped significantly, where I just prefer Mac OS because it's the same size screen and it doesn't, tip over in my if I'm sitting on my lap or anything. So
Yeah.
For me, I agree. I don't need a new iPad Air or an iPad Pro. I just would love another reason to keep it around, because at this point I'm honestly thinking about selling it, because I don't use it enough now with my new MacBook Air. So
One example of something that I definitely became a complete convert on, as far as like, this is better on iOS than it was when I was doing it on the Mac, is I don't edit this podcast. That's Spencer's job. But I edited the podcast that I have from before. And for a long time, I was looking for good software to do that with. And I ended up buying Logic, which is Apple's sort of professional like DAW, and using that. And it's fine. It's a fine piece of software. It's extremely advanced. It does a million things, most of which I don't use. The downside is that because it's professional software, it's almost impossible to learn how to use just by like going in and looking at it, because it's so complicated. So it took a while for me to get even kind of remotely productive in it. And then even when I did feel like I was reasonably productive, it was still like, sort of, I felt moderately productive at best, basically. And at one point I heard good things about Ferrite, which is an audio editing program for iOS, and really shines on the iPad. And so I bought it, I tried it out, and I hated it because I didn't know how it worked either. And it wasn't super obvious. And so I was like, well, this really isn't any better. And I just spent $25 to upgrade to Pro on this to really use it. And I kind of hate it, whatever. And then Jason Snell, who runs the Six Colors blog, he's a big podcaster and has used all kinds of software. He actually did like a video, sort of not really a tutorial, but just kind of an explanation of his workflow. And it ended up being sort of close enough to a tutorial that you could use it to kind of learn. And so he showed how he used Ferrite to edit podcasts, and in particular, how he used the combination of touch with his fingers and the pencil, which you can configure in Ferrite to do different things, really sped up his workflow. And so when I watched the video, I was like, oh, that's how you use it. For one thing, I learned how to use Ferrite, but also I specifically kind of learned that workflow of him using the pencil and touch, multi-touch to get things done. And so I tried it out. I loaded up the raw files for the podcast and I started editing it. And I noticed that I was significantly faster and more efficient at editing the podcast. And it's because basically, if you've never edited a podcast before, it's mostly you line everything up, you start listening, and then where there are places where either there are noises, there's overtalk, there's any kind of suboptimal audio, right? You cut out random noises, you split things apart so that people aren't talking over each other, that kind of thing. So it's a lot of like manipulating small little pieces of audio. And it turns out using the pencil and touch to do that, I can play the audio, and when I see little snippets of audio that I don't want, you can actually just take the pencil and you can drag it backwards over that audio clip, and it deletes it from the timeline. So you end up, what I found is I ended up being able to use a combination of the pencil for some actions, multi-touch for others, and I could actually go through the podcast and edit it. You essentially have to listen to it and sort of fix things as you go. And I found that I was like 1.5 to 2x, maybe even 2.5x on editing a podcast compared to how long it took to record it. So if it was an hour podcast, it would take between 2 and 2.5 hours for me to edit it. Because you have to like back up and whatever. And I found that I was more like 1.5x at the outside compared, so maybe even better, editing with ferrites, because I got to spend more time just letting it play and listening, and then quickly making edits here and there with the pencil as I went, and there was less stopping. And so that's a concrete example of like changing the modality of how you interact with the software changed the workflow of what I needed to do to get this work done and get a finished product. And it significantly increased my efficiency. And I went from, this is kind of an interesting idea, but I don't know if I'll ever actually want to do this, to, oh, I don't even open Logic anymore. I don't edit anymore. But when I did, I was like, I'm using Ferrite every time, because not only is it better, but also it's just, the iPad is super convenient. Like I can just fold it up and bring it with me in the car or whatever. Like, and I can kind of get stuff done in little bits and pieces, right? And then you have the whole idea of like instant on, and a lot of the things that we're now very much appreciating with the M1 Mac. You have had all of those things with the iPad forever. And so that was, while I'm not totally convinced on iPad as a general use computer replacement in my, in every part of my life, in that example, it's like, oh, I totally understand why people who are on this train and who have been able to switch, right? Like Federico Viticci famously is full-blown iOS all the time, doesn't even own a Mac anymore. Like he's just all in on the iPad. In fact, I think he owns 2 of them, so he can have like 2 screens at once. And, he's really kind of gone all in on the iPad lifestyle. And for him as a writer and an editor and a creator of mostly, written content, works great for him. And that's fantastic. And so I always kind of appreciated that in general, but I kind of got it as like why you would be so excited about it, because once I realized that for me, Ferrite was actually a better choice for this particular workflow. It's like, oh wow, if only that were true for more workflows in my life, I can totally see how you would just like gradually just migrate more and more and more to the iPad till pretty soon that's all you need to get all your work done. It's just, for us as developers, for iOS developers in particular, it's just not, let's say it's at best not practical to do any serious work on the iPad in that way, and sort of at its worst, essentially impossible to do so. I think I'm basically in the same sort of boat that you are, Spencer, that like I want to have more of a reason to use it.
Yeah.
And in that story I just told, like I got to see sort of firsthand when it works really well, and it's really exciting. But for us in our lives, I feel like we're not quite at the point yet where we can do that with more of what we need to get done in our daily life. So Xcode on iOS, come on, Apple, you can do it.
I know.
Announce it at DubDub this year. You want to.
The thing is, I don't even think like Xcode on iOS would fix it, because when you're developing, you don't just have Xcode open.
Yeah,
you have
that's true.
Xcode, the simulator, 17 Safari windows of research. Like there's so much going on to kind of assemble everything for doing development. It's not just sitting down and writing code in isolation.
Can you run an XDR off an iPad? Is that a thing?
You can, but it doesn't like give you any extra abilities. It's just a zoomed in version you're looking at on the iPad.
Okay.
Which is
all right. Well,
silly.
Yeah.
But They're like, the iPad is such a good excuse to do one thing but do it amazingly great, and I think
Yes.
that's the part that Apple really needs to concentrate on. If you're going to have an app for the iPad, it needs to be a better app than anything it could have been
Yeah.
on the Mac, because
Yeah.
you are taking over the entire device, and that adds so much opportunity, like you said, Ben, where you can use multi-touch and the pencil at the same time. You have two independent input methods that are fighting for interaction time, but the app can embrace that and really make a smooth editing opportunity through that. And I think if there are more stories like that, that's where the iPad can really excel. If you're writing, you don't want the distraction of everything else.
Right.
You
Yeah.
just want to focus on that, and that's why it works so well for writers. If you're drawing, same thing. You might at most have like a reference up, but you can grab a second screen to do that, or you can put that on your TV or have it on slide over for the iPad. And then the iPad as a drawing instrument is the best digital drawing instrument. There's nothing else that comes close. So if you're an artist, that story is there for you. But
Yeah, that's a no-brainer.
if you need to do anything that requires having many things open,
Yeah.
you're dead in the water. Like, that's where the iPad falls apart, and that's where so many of us developers, we kind of find ourselves, because doing development is not just something that you do in isolation. You
Right.
are testing, you're researching, you're finding answers to problems, and weighing these pros and cons constantly. Not to mention designing. Like, there's so many aspects that you're just
Yeah.
kind of going in a loop when you're doing development, that I don't think the iPad is really ever going to solve, unless it's something that you can connect to a computer, or not to a computer, to a big screen, and then have multiple things up at once. But that's essentially a Mac at that point.
Right.
So Apple can take it in that direction. They can take it in the direction that it becomes a console for a Mac in a different room. I would love that. That would solve all
yeah.
my issues. I don't need a powerful iPad for that, though. So sorry, Apple. It's not like a Pro is not going to be the thing that solves that for me. Maybe an iPad is the souped up version of an iPhone's camera system. Like, you have an opportunity. You have tons of space in this thing. The board is like this big. It's the same board as in an iPhone. It's on an iPad. The rest of it's battery. You can put a better lens system. You can put a better camera on that. That can be your camera story, where you can let people have a dinky little iPhone, and if they want to take really good pictures, they can pull out their iPad with a stupid big viewfinder, but it can also have a stupid large megapixel count, and you can get crazy good detail on that. Like, there's so many opportunities there it really does feel like Apple's not really thinking about it. And it's kind of sad that, like, it just takes an hour of us brainstorming, and we can kind of think of all these different potentials for it that are within the realm of possibility. It's not even so technologically advanced that we need to wait 10 years to see this kind of stuff.
I got the solution. You just need 4 iPads, right? So you have one for the development, and then you have like one for your many tabs of Safari. You have one for your simulator. And the best part is, to call back to our previous topic, you keep like the latest iPad, and then you keep the 3 previous generations of iPads for all your auxiliary devices. And now you're
they
doing
get
both
the
things.
slower and slower task goes on the slower and slower device.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So you've got your old devices for testing, and you also have lots of screen real estate to get your work done. Easy.
That reminds
yes.
me. When we got our first generation iPads, like the very first one, I got one and my mom got one. We both got those little folio cases, and you can slip one folio case into the other and turn it into like a book where you have an iPad on each side. And I'm like, look, multitasking,
Nice.
because that wasn't a thing back then.
Nice.
And joking
That's
aside,
awesome.
like that's really what you need is 2 screens,
Yeah.
but they need to communicate. Like, you can't
Right.
have 2 screens in isolation. And it seems like Apple is totally for having these devices used in isolation. Like, if you have 3 computers,
Right.
it's a nightmare. You don't even want to do development on more than one of those, because that's not where your stuff is. Like, having a stupid console screen, that's all I want. A dumb terminal is better, because you can access the one device that has everything that you needed to, rather than try to hope that iCloud and stuff like that is going to get better. It's probably not going to get better significantly enough for you to be able to pull off stuff like that, especially for like video editing. Like,
Right.
just syncing that is a nightmare.
Yeah.
Even audio is a significant task if you have big audio files that you need to wait for them to appear on the iPad if you want to start editing them there.
Right.
Like all of those are friction points, and that's kind of a shame.
Yep. Moral of the story: the iPad is the awkward middle child. That's what it is. It's just, yeah, I don't know.
It's waiting for puberty to hit, right?
Yeah.
So on that topic, final things as far as what could be announced, as far as what we know of from rumors. I mean, Apple could pull out something we weren't expecting out of midair, of course.
True.
But the last thing that they could possibly announce is new Macs. Do you think we're going to get new Macs at this event? Are we going to have to wait until WWDC? Are my 3 Pro Display XDRs that I ordered going to just sit in the corner of a room? Totally didn't order 3 Pro Display XDRs. But
Yikes.
what
Those
what
feelings
is
for your
gonna,
wallet there.
what do you think is Apple's plan with new Macs for this event?
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I mean, going off of the, I guess, global situation, it sounds like everyone, including Apple, is being affected. Well, we know everyone, but Apple even is being affected by the chip shortage. And so I could go both ways, where I can definitely see them saying, hey, we've got a new iMac. It has just an M1, nothing new. It's just a straight M1. I can also see them waiting till maybe something like DubDub to announce something like they did with the Mac Pro.
Yeah, I have a feeling that I'm, especially since this episode probably will come out maybe just before or just after that event. I am probably wrong, but I have a feeling they're not going to talk about Macs at this event. I bet you it's probably going to be the Find My stuff, so whether that includes actually launching AirTags or not, and then the new iPads. I think those are pretty solidly locks on what they're going to talk about. But I actually have a feeling that they're not going to announce new Macs, and that if they were, in particular, if they were to announce an M1 Mac, iMac, that they probably would do that at DubDub. Is kind of my thinking on that, is that they would hold that for that. Because they traditionally don't even really announce hardware at DubDub at all. Usually, it's a little bit rare for them to do that. Was it the Mac Pro? Was that last year or the year before they announced at DubDub? So stuff like that. But that's kind of an exception. They don't normally do that. But in this case, an M1 iMac would be an excellent development machine. So I could see them potential M1 or even M1X, like slightly faster version of the M1 chip as a development machine. I think could be great. So I suspect that they won't say anything about iMacs. Plus, they have generally been much less about jamming stuff in. So they have a narrative they want to get across in these events, especially since they're not live anymore. They're now like fully pre-recorded, and we're not like we're watching something that was recorded, that's probably already been recorded at this point. It's probably already been recorded and edited and is ready to go. They typically don't like to put things in there that don't belong, meaning like just sort of pushing things together and announcing them all at once. They've more recently been doing stuff where they announce things when they're ready, more or less, and that they will just have multiple events, or they'll just issue things with press releases or whatever, rather than feeling like, well, this is our one chance, so we're going to take the next hour and a half on the stage to like cram everything in here and
Right.
announce everything all at once. Like, they haven't been doing that recently. So, and to me, if you're going to have a Find My / AirTags sort of event that also includes new iPads, tacking an M1 iMac onto the end of that feels like it's an also ran. So
It's a one more thing.
It's a one more thing, which they don't really do anymore. So so I feel like it's probably that we probably get nothing on the Mac front, and I'm also kind of suspecting that we won't get a new Mac or a new iPad Mini. Like, even though I want one, I would actually I feel like they probably unless they do an iPad Mini Pro, like people have been rumored that they might be doing, I would bet they'll probably just skip the Mini altogether and just release like a new 11 and a new 13-inch iPad Pro and call it a day. So prepare. I guess I'm prepared to be totally wrong on all of that, but that's just my.
I don't know. It's been a couple years since they updated the iPad Mini.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Now's the time.
It remains
That
a
could be
part of
the
their
line.
lineup, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't, axe it like they did the HomePod or anything.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they did Revit,
Yeah.
with the most recent one, they did the 5th gen. They did add pencil support. They added a
Yeah.
new chip. Like they did, they did some work to freshen it up. So they certainly could just do the same thing. I mean, I can't imagine that switching it to like an all-screen Face ID Pencil 2 support is that difficult. Like, I mean, you basically take the same body and just put the new screen on it.
It would be really weird to me for them to have all of the iPads with kind of the full screen, except for the
And then the Mini is
iPad
just that
Mini.
one. Yeah, that's different. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
Although they still sell
the
Don't-
SE.
don't they sell one that's just called the iPad? That is
Yeah.
it's like the 9.
Oh, that's true.
is it
For
the 9.8
education.
or the 10.5 inch? And
Yeah.
it's like home button and all that.
Yeah, I forgot about that one.
As the cheapest
Maybe they
one.
update that too.
Yeah.
I don't know. But then I guess there's no difference between the Air.
Or they do a new Air, and then the old Air becomes like it takes the slot of like the entry level 329 I think is like the entry level iPad.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think,
D-
Dimitri?
Does this mean that keynotes can leak since they're all pre-recorded?
Oh, that would be crazy.
Like the actual video could leak? Yeah,
That
I mean,
would
Yeah.
be insane.
Like the announcement leaked on Siri.
Yeah.
So you can only imagine as they're setting up their CDN for the video
man.
that
That
kind of gets out a day earlier than it's supposed to. Oh, can you imagine?
That would be a bad look for Apple's encryption if they're like, oh, shoot, someone got a hold of our keynote.
Well, it's not encrypted, right? It's just it needs to be somewhere for people to start watching it.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully,
And it's
before
live broadcast.
it's supposed to be released, it should hopefully be encrypted and stored somewhere safe.
Or, yeah, stored
You'd
somewhere safe. Yeah.
So
That'd be bad. That'd be definitely a bad
On a
look
floppy
for
disk.
Apple.
floppy disk. Well, that's how you save
On
it, right? You need to use a
14,000 floppy disks.
Yeah, that's true. That would be a lot of floppies. Burn a Blu-ray disc or something. I don't
There
know.
you go.
One per quarter screen. Can you get a whole frame on it?
Yeah, I wonder how many frames of 4K video you could fit on a floppy disk. I bet you're right. That
Not
it's probably
one.
Not even
portion
one.
of one frame. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely not one. What was the largest size of a floppy disk?
1.4 megabytes.
Yeah, definitely not even one.
You could probably fit a few frames in 1.4 megabytes. Depends how many megabits per second, right? If it's a 10 megabit per second thing, then divided by 8.
Doing a little quick math.
So 1.25 megabytes per second. So you can get a second of footage in 1.25 megabytes.
Oh. Okay.
So you might be able to get a few frames per floppy. So
That would be fun, just, interchanging them over and over, waiting for
Quick.
it to load.
So if
Get
it's
it in
an
the second
hour-long
bay,
event,
third bay.
that's 3,600 floppy disks.
All right. There we go.
gotta have a dedicated person at those two bays, swapping them in and out as one finishes. Get the next one ready.
Let's make this a reality.
Let's do it.
For those who don't know, that was an actual thing. Like when you're running software, you would have to put one disk in, and then your software would tell you, okay, please eject this disk and put the other disk in to save, because you couldn't save. The computer didn't have anything on it. You saved to a disk that didn't have your software on it because your software took up that whole disk. So that was totally a thing to swap out disks. So we're only half joking that we'd have someone kind of swap disks out. But that is thankfully not a thing anymore. But
yeah, be happy that we live in an era where that is no longer required.
For real.
Okay. So moving off of our topics, this week's episode is brought to you by Swiftly Built and their Advanced Data Display course. Come learn about collection views, generics, diffable data sources, compositional layouts, and local notifications, and a brand new course by our very own Ben Golke. During the month of May, Ben will be teaching an immersive course with live instruction where you'll learn all about collection views, protocol-oriented programming, dynamic datasets, advanced layout techniques, and the iOS notification system. The course will be taught with practice material focused on the topics discussed, and the month will culminate in a capstone project where you'll put all these new skills into practice in a week-long final app. Tickets are available now on Eventbrite, linked in the show notes, or search for Swiftly Built on eventbrite.com. The course starts on May 1st, so don't wait to sign up. Ben, anything you want to add?
Just that it's a live talk course. I'm going to be teaching it throughout the month of May, and we're going to do both lessons and also Q&As and stuff. So there'll be plenty of time, not just to learn the material, but also to work with me and your fellow students to kind of help solidify that content. Lots of really hands-on stuff. We're going to be building apps basically the whole time. And so if you want lots of sort of great hands-on experience with building a variety of apps, sort of app examples to showcase different things, then check out the course.
Yeah, that's definitely a rare thing nowadays to get hands-on experience where you have the instructor actually helping you. It's not pre-recorded. Ben is going to be there, and you can use him to ask questions and have him guide you through the whole process. So I would say this is more of an intermediate iOS level.
Yep.
Or
I think that's fair. I mean, basically, if you know your way around Xcode and you've built maybe a few apps from tutorials or whatever, I think that's probably enough. But you don't. It's probably not a great idea if you are if you want to build apps but you've never opened Xcode before. That's I would say a pretty novice level and probably something that you might get kind of lost with as we jump in. But if you've built a few apps through not necessarily your own apps, but even if you've just kind of gone through tutorials and you understand the basic structure of the app lifecycle and also of Swift, then I think this is a great way to kind of level up your skills to the next level by hanging out and checking out all these cool things. We're going to be talking about things that are pretty new. So different data sources, compositional layouts, those kinds of ideas have only been around since I want to say dub 2019. So we've only really had 2 years to even have them be public, and they're not widely adopted yet. So if you were to come and learn these things, not only is it tons of fun, but also you would have, I think, a pretty marketable skill in that way that you know something that lots of other people don't, and so that makes you even kind of stand out more.
Awesome. So thank you so much to Ben and Swiftly Built and the course on advanced data display for sponsoring code completion. So that leaves us with compiler error, my favorite segment where I get to test my fellow completionist knowledge about Swift, Apple, and all things development. And today we have a theme, and that is HDR video. So let's go through these one at a time. So statement number 1, high dynamic range video expands on standard dynamic range video, which is HDR and SDR, by increasing not only the luminance, but also the bit depth and color volume. Statement number 2, standard dynamic range video is defined according to a maximum luminance of 100 nits, limited by the capabilities of CRT-based display technology. Statement number 3, the Ultra HD Alliance defines a display as being HDR capable only if it is able to reach a limited peak brightness of at least 1000 nits. And statement number 4, an HDR display is capable of displaying content mastered for any maximum brightness thanks to a technique called tone mapping. So let's go ahead and start with Spencer.
Awesome.
Good luck.
Yeah, I know, right? All of these I don't know a ton about HDR. So it definitely expands on the standard dynamic range by increasing the luminance. However, I don't know about bit depth because you could have like HDR 10-bit. You could probably have HDR 8, maybe not 8-bit actually. I don't know. Is there 12-bit video?
He's not going
to
help
be
you.
relieved to be revealed post compilation.
Okay. I don't even know what color volume means. I'll pause on that one. SDR sounds like it would be about 100 nits based on a CRT ish. I don't know. Number 3, this is where like the certifications are weird because you've got like true HDR, which I think is like a peak brightness of 1,000 nits, but then you have like HDR 400 and 600 and I think 800 or something like that. So I can see that being true, but like kind of depends on how you spin it. If it means like true HDR certification, then yeah. As capable of displaying content mastered for any maximum brightness. I don't really think I think I want to go with number 4, because if you ever watch any HDR content on like a display that has a lower peak brightness or something, it doesn't look good. Yeah, I'm gonna go with number 4. I'm not really confident in this one at all, though.
For somebody who doesn't know
works on
much
a video
about,
app.
yeah, for somebody
Wow.
who claims to not know much about HDR, that was a lot of HDR knowledge you just dropped.
Thanks, I guess.
I didn't even know there were different standards. Like that's
Ben?
For me, I feel like number 1 is correct. I agree that I don't know what color volume means, but I have heard of bit depth, and I do think that there is more to HDR than just luminance. So I'm going to go with 1 being true. Totally believe the idea that 100 nits was the maximum brightness you could get out of a CRT display, and therefore that was that's where they pegged the standard originally, and then we've gone beyond that. Number 3 sounds the problem is they all sound plausible.
Yeah, this one feels really tough.
Number 3 sounds plausible in that it's only that basically maybe there are other standards where people are more lax, but the Ultra HD Alliance is a nitpicky group that is like, no, you got to have 1,000 nits or better to be considered HDR capable, as per our certification. That sounds plausible. I would tend to agree with you, Spencer, but for some reason, rattling around in my head, I feel like I've heard the term tone mapping before. So
no, for sure.
In particular, on Accidental Tech Podcast, whenever John Syracuse gets started on all this kind of stuff, he knows about a lot of things. For some reason, I feel like I can hear him saying those words in my head from some previous episode of that show, but I could be making that up. That could be a false memory. I have no idea, but it sounds like I'm pretty sure I've heard that before. So that's what makes me think that maybe that is true, but then the problem is like, well, which one is false?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just gonna solidarity. I'm gonna go with number 4 mostly just because that's what you picked.
Okay.
And we'll just go from there. Who knows?
Okay.
Go down with the ship together.
I was right
let's do
last
it.
time, and I'm right like every 8th time. So this is was not. We don't have good odds here, but we'll just go with it.
No.
Okay, so let's start with number 1 and lead up to that final
Okay.
little by little.
You highlighted 4, and I was like, oh no.
Well,
right.
I'm using Sketch to do this whole thing, so I need to unhide the layer just to see it.
Oh,
right?
you're good. You're good.
Like any good reality show host, he's gonna make us wait through several more commercial breaks before we can.
Perfect.
Got to
Next
milk
sponsor.
the audience.
Yeah, right.
Thanks so much to our sponsor this week for.
You're welcome.
Okay, so high dynamic range video expands on standard dynamic range by increasing not only the luminance, but also the bit depth and color volume. So luminance, as you might guess, is the brightness, right? Bit depth is how many colors you have between 0 and 1. So if you have 8 bits, then you can divide that by 8. No, just kidding. You divide it by 2 to the power of 8, which means that you have 256 gradations, basically. If you have 10-bit, then you can have 1024 gradations. So the bit depth depends on how many bits you have to describe how many levels you have. Spencer, you were asking, can you have 12-bit video? Totally. ProRes can go up to 16-bit. It just depends how much you want to flood the wire sending to the display. But SDI video, which is the cable that they use on set to grab raw footage, that will typically use the full amount of bit depth that is available for the camera to send out. And I believe it goes up to 16 bits for practicality.
Gotcha.
That's like 65,000 levels, I believe, if I'm doing that math correctly. So you have plenty of room there to describe basically every shade of every color that you can think of. Now, color volume describes how colorful it is. If you're restricted to the sRGB space, which is
Oh.
traditional for like older monitors, then you have a certain amount of red and a certain amount of green, but not more vibrant of a red and more vibrant of a green. You typically don't talk about color volume when it comes to blue because turns out we can't see blue all too well, and so it just kind of sits there, and even as the standards expand, blue kind of just sits there. It's the same blue, but green typically expands a lot, red expands a lot, which means that you see a lot more yellow and things like that. You may have heard of P3 before, which is the screen that your recent Apple device probably has. That one can describe much brighter reds, yellows, and greens than previously. And you'll see that if you have an old device and a new device side by side, and you turn like the tone, true tone off, you'll see that color just pop quite significantly. So HDR absolutely does. This is a code completion. It absolutely does expand in all three of these. You need more bit depth because you have more color and more luminance. So if you had 8 bits, you would see bands all the way through as you increase the brightness and the color. So you need at least 10, and sometimes you can go as much as 12 with HDMI, or up to 16 if you have a low resolution, because as soon as you increase these bits, the bit depth, you have less space for more pixels, obviously. So that one's true. Going on to number 2, standard dynamic range video is defined according to maximum luminance of 100 nits. And this is limited by the capabilities of CRT-based display technology. So this is standard dynamic range for home video. What do you think the maximum brightness is for cinema? So DCI, Digital Cinema Initiative, I think, is a different standard for cinema. And the maximum brightness is actually 48 nits. The reason for this is because if the bulb was brighter, it would melt the film. So that's the limit.
Interesting.
The 100 nits comes from the phosphors that were used for CRT displays. That's how bright they got. And the color that you get becomes sRGB because that's just the color that you get. So a lot of these standards were just based on the display technology. And when flat screens and LCDs came later, it was kind of hamstrung by this because it needed to match that. It couldn't be, well, as you know, TV manufacturers like to make more vibrant displays, but that just makes people look orange and not particularly interesting to look at when you're watching like a movie that's been very carefully calibrated, and then it reaches your TV and everything is out of the window. So that's what the limits were for standard dynamic range, and that's why it's at 100 nits, just because that's what CRTs were capable of. So that one is also true. That leads us to number 3, where the Ultra HD Alliance defines a display as being HDR capable only if it can reach a limited peak brightness of at least 1000 nits. So when I say limited, I mean the whole screen doesn't have to reach 1000 nits, but a light bulb that turns on the scene, that one needs to reach 1000 nits. Now, this might be peculiar because we've heard of different HDR displays, some that can reach 1000 nits, others that can't. So one technology in particular is OLED. Up until recently was not reaching 1000 nits. So were those not HDR displays? Well, it turns out the Ultra HD Alliance made no such stipulation because this is the compiler error. 1000 nits is a nice target to hit, but that's not what defines an HDR display. In fact, the only thing that defines
contrast
an HDR display is the fact that it can play HDR content.
Seriously?
Basically,
that's so lame.
There are very few actual limitations. Now, what you were saying, Spencer, about like you looking at HDR content on a non-HDR display and it looks all wonky, that's because it's not an HDR display. So an HDR display, leading into the last one a little bit, is one that's capable of tone mapping the brightness to its display profile, and it can then go ahead and show as correct an image as it can, based on its own capabilities. Now, the Ultra HD Alliance does have some stipulations in terms of what kind of display counts as HDR. And one of them is if it either has a peak brightness of 1000 nits and a black level that's less than 0.05 nits, which is a contrast ratio about 20,000. So you're kind of there with the contrast ratio, or it has a peak brightness of over 540 nits and a black level that's less than 0.0005, so basically pitch black. So if you have that contrast ratio, that's about 1,000,000 to 1, and that's what allows OLEDs to be considered HDR. It's all about what pushes your ability to see the brights and the shadows in that scene. Now, of course, you would not have that OLED be in a very bright room. It would not look HDR, but in a pitch black room, it would be HDR AF, like as bright as it can be, and because your eyes will adjust to the darkness of the room before that display turns on, and then everything will be really singeing bright. So that's what makes an HDR display in terms of the Ultra HD Alliance. But in terms of the overall industry, an HDR display is only one that can play HDR content. Whether it displays that content well or not, that has nothing to do with it. So sorry about number 4.
So I was right.
True.
Tone mapping is a thing, and you led me astray, Spencer. Thanks.
Sorry, dude.
So
Story of my life.
I probably wouldn't have got it right anyway.
That's basically what tone mapping is. It's to take the footage, which says I can like this scene, it can reach 4,000 nits. Here's my curve for how I am mapping my display values or my pixel values to how bright something should be. And then the display will intelligently say, okay, I can't do 4,000 nits. In fact, very few displays can. But I can totally do 1,000. So I'm going to take the 1,000 to 4,000 range, and I'm just going to like curve that out.
Scale
so that way it's
right.
not like clipped, but it ramps up to that point. And then after that point, it's just going to be bright white regardless. So most parts of the scene will just be in that bright white. Like if you have like the sun, whether it's 1,000 or 4,000 does not matter. So you're not even going to notice this for the most part. And that's what HDR technology is all about, is this tone mapping, so that way the display can try to accurately show what the content is trying to tell it to show. Now, this is in other terms just called color matching, which has not really been a thing up until recently. You just kind of expect that the display knows what to do with the content and you show it. But HDR kind of really pushes that as much as it can. So,
well, now that you've explained that, I feel really dumb.
Well, you knew more than the common person on what HDR is, so you should be
None
proud
of it
of
mattered. I did not win.
Well, now you know for next time.
Yeah.
Right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It's all learning opportunity.
Sure.
He's not buying it, Dimitri. He's not.
No.
Darn. So as always, I want to personally thank everyone for listening in this week. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Code Completion to know when new episodes get released. Be sure to follow and join codecompletion.io/join the club. I post all sorts of fun articles that I find throughout the week in there, and it's also a great place to ask questions, especially if you have questions about Ben's new course. You can get help on there as well from other developers who are not taking the course but may have more experience. So you should definitely go ahead and check that out. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, give us 5 stars. I heard that's a thing that I forgot about for 26 episodes. So give us a good rating on that. It apparently helps people find the show, and that way they can enjoy it as much as you do. And once again, I want to give my thanks to Ben, who is at Ferrousguy. That's FERROUSGUY on Twitter. And Spencer, who is at Spencer C. Curtis. That's SPENCERCCURTIS on Twitter, for joining me this week. My name, once again, is Dimitri. You can find me at Dimitri Buniol. That's DIMITRIBOUNIOL. And we'll see you all next week.
Bye.
See ya.